Good evening, everyone. In continuation with our normal webinar series, today we have Asami India Journal Club. Well, we have started this event of Journal Club just to introduce our various authors from Asami India who have contributed in publishing, and they have published very good articles. So, just to introduce them to you and just to develop the kind of scientific temperament among all the members, just how to go for research, how to develop a research methodology, and how to go for publications. So we have expert panel today also to have light on that. And in continuation with, so I am handing over to our immediate past president, Dr. Manish Dhawan. Sir, please introduce the faculty and continue it.
Good evening, everyone, and I welcome you all for this very nice Asami initiative. And this is the COVID time. This is second COVID time. So I think it will topic for today is post-traumatic cubitus virus long-term follow-up by corrective osteotomy, and it will be presented by Dr. Rajat Agarwal. Dr. Rajat Agarwal practices in Agarwal Orthopedic Center in Gorakhpur, and he has done his fellowship from Professor Dror Pale in USA. And now also he is the president-elect of Asami India. So he will be our speaker, and also I welcome our two panelists, Dr. Siddharth Sharma. He is Joint Secretary of Asami India, and also he is the Associate Professor in Postgraduate Institute, Chandigarh. So he's a very young, dynamic member of Asami India, and I welcome him. And one of the other panelists is our senior past president, Dr. Arya Agarwal. He'll be joining soon. So Dr. Arya Agarwal also works at Gorakhpur in Agarwal Orthopedic Center, and he has many publications to his credit, and he has written a lot of books. So everyone knows, everyone is familiar who is Dr. Arya Agarwal. So with this note, I will basically start the proceedings. I request Dr. Rajat to start his presentation. Dr. Rajat, please.
Well, sir, please share your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ravi, is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible, and just put it on slide mode and go ahead, sir.
Okay. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of India Journal Club. So today's topic is our article which recently got published in Journal of Pediatric Orthopedics last year in December on cubitus varus. First, we go for the introduction, then patient methods and surgical details, results, discussion, conclusion, and acknowledgements. So we'll be going one by one. First, the introduction. So, usual introduction, first we introduce the topic. In this case, the topic is varus. So, what is cubitus varus? Basically, it is inward inclination of supinated forearm on an extended elbow. And it is one of the most common complications of supraconical fractures in children, usually 9 to 58%.
So, normally to treat the cubitus varus, we have to do a surgical procedure, the osteotomy. And the indication for osteotomy is either there is an unacceptable cosmetic appearance or there is functional impairment. And the principle of osteotomy is the cubitus varus is because of inadequate reduction. There is a medial displacement and internal rotation of the distal fragment. So during the surgery, we correct this varus tilt and rotation. So as we go to the literature, many different types of osteotomies have been described, and usually people do lateral closing wedge osteotomy. So, but the problem with this lateral closing wedge osteotomy is there's a poor cosmetic appearance due to the lateral condylar prominence. The deformity may recur because the distal fragment is very small, and many times the screws or the wires are unable to hold the distal fragment when internal fixation is done. And there's a tendency of the distal fragment to go again into the varus. So to overcome all this, what we propose the solution is the Ilizarov, because it overcomes the limitations of internal fixation. All of the limitations, like this is one of the only method where we can go for post-op adjustments, which will lead to complete accurate correction. And obviously it is minimally invasive. And one of the good advantages as with any Ilizarov surgery is it's the early mobilization of the elbow. So the next part will be going with the patients and methods. Next. So when we'll be writing a paper and you will be describing a procedure, so you will be having these type of questions which has to be answered, like it's a type of study. It's a retrospective study, the center. The data collection was done by a computerized software from 2005 to 2018. The sample size means the number of patients, that is 32, in which there are 26 males and 6 females. The inclusion criteria, which was a post-traumatic cubitus varus deformity of equal to or more than 10 degrees, and age of a pediatric group less than 18 years, and the surgical correction was done by Ilizarov external fixator. Then what was the exclusion criteria? The patients who had undergone any other corrective surgery, they were not included in the study, and the patient which had incomplete database. What was the mean age? 9.2 years, which was the dominant side of deformity left. Dominant hand was involved in 53.1%. The mean duration of surgery since the injury was 2.9 years. What was the etiology? Supracondylar fractures and unknown in 2 cases. What was the treatment which was there done at the time of initial injury? Either closed reduction and casting, or closed reduction and percutaneous spinning, or open reduction and internal fixation. What was the mean time of union after you did your surgery? 11 weeks. And what is your mean follow-up? That is 4 years. So you have to answer all these questions. Now, we go for the pre-op assessment. Pre-op assessment can be done by clinically or radiologically. Clinically, we focus on the carrying angle, the range of motion, the internal rotation deformity, and the neurovascular assessment. Radiological assessment is done by FORA, HEW angle, and the LPI. I will be describing these terms later on. Next. So what is the carrying angle? It is the angle between the lines joining the midpoint of the wrist, midpoint of the antecubital space, and midpoint of the humeral head, with elbow in full extension and wrist in supination. So this is the way to measure the carrying angle by goniometer. Next. Then this is a very interesting clinical test which we do for the internal rotation deformity. It was developed by Yamamoto et al. What has to be done? The patient is bent slightly forward. You place the forearm on the back with the elbow flexed 90 degrees and shoulder hyperextended. With elbow as a fulcrum, you try to lift the forearm from the back to have the maximum internal rotation of the humerus. Normally, in normal patients, the forearm cannot be brought up from the back. But in cases of cubitus varus, because there is internal rotation deformity, the forearm is lifted off from the back, forming an angle which is the amount of internal rotation deformity. So by this way, you measure the internal rotation deformity. Now we come to HEW angle, that is the humerus elbow wrist angle. What is this? This is the angle between the anatomical axis of the humerus and the anatomical axis of the forearm. So it is done on the AP radiograph of both the upper extremities with elbow in extension and forearm in full supination. The anatomical axis of the humerus is the mid-diaphyseal line of the humerus, which we draw, the mid-diaphyseal line. How you draw the anatomical axis of the forearm? For this, you take 2 transverse lines First, at the level of the bicipital tuberosity of the radius, and second line at a maximum interosseous space between the radius and the ulna. And then you point the midpoint of these two transverse lines. The line connecting the midpoint of these two transverse lines is the anatomical axis of the forearm. Now, this anatomical axis of the humerus and anatomical axis of the forearm, the point of interaction of both of these is the fora, and the angle between these two lines is the HEW angle. Now, how do you calculate the amount of correction which has to be done in a case of cubitus varus? It is the sum of this varus deformity, the HEW angle, and the HEW angle of the normal side. Because this is a tricky thing. Suppose you just correct the amount of varus. No, you have to make it to the amount of valgus which is there on the normal side. So this is the article by which you can learn the measurement of this HEW angle. Next. Now there is another term, what we call as lateral prominence index. It is the difference between the medial and lateral width of the bone from the central mid-humerus axis. That how much the bone is protruded on the lateral and the medial side from the center point. It is measured on an AP radiograph. How it is measured? It is measured from the point of the intersection of the humerus mid-diaphyseal axis. You draw a line mid-diaphyseal and you draw the interepicondylar axis. The length AC and BC, these are the lateral and the medial prominences. Normally what happens, medial prominence is slightly more prominent. Usually it is negative in normal cases. In cubitus varus, or in cases of open osteotomy, acute osteotomy and internal fixation, the lateral side gets more prominent, because of which the lateral prominence index becomes positive. Otherwise, normally it is negative in normal cases. Now, this is a very interesting CT assessment of the cubitus varus, which we have done recently, and we are writing a paper on it, and hope so we will be publishing a paper soon on the CT analysis of the cubitus varus. So as we did the CT of the patients of cubitus varus and we tried to compare with the normal elbow, what we found out, that we found out 7 differences between a normal and an abnormal elbow on the CAT scan. First, we found out that the trochlea was large in cubitus varus. Next slide. Second, we saw that the capitulum was larger in cubitus varus compared to the normal side. Next. Third, the length of the articular surface of the ulna, it increases in cubitus varus. Next, the trochlear notch is shifted laterally in the cubitus varus. Next. Next. And the diameter, even the diameter of the radial head, it increases in cubitus varus. Next. The 6th is the radial notch is deformed in cubitus varus. And last, the oligrammal process is shifted medially in cubitus varus. These are interesting findings which we found out in CAT scan. Next. And even CAT scan is the only way in which you can measure very accurately the humeral torsion, the amount of internal rotation. What you do, you make an x-axis in the humeral head and a z-axis in the epicondyle, and you measure the angle between them. Usually, in normal cases, it is 44 degrees. Next. And this is a slide of a patient of cubitus varus in which there was a humeral torsion of 55 degrees. It means that the internal rotation deformity was 11 degrees. Next. Next, we go to for the surgical details. Next. So for the surgical details, first, we make a frame pre-operatively. That is very important. How do you make it? You take 2 full rings of appropriate size. The distal ring has to be at the level of the epicondyles, and the proximal ring has to be at the level of the anterior axillary fold. We make juxta-articular hinges placed anteriorly and posteriorly in the sagittal plane, and then these hinges are loosened to position the distal ring parallel to the elbow joint during the surgery to mimic the deformity. And there is a distraction rod on the medial side. And when you gradually correct it, the rings become parallel. So this is the step-by-step surgery, how to perform an Elizarov of the cubitus varus. The step 1, the first, what we call reference wire, we take an olive wire and we pass in the epicondyle from the posterolateral to the anteromedial surface. So next. Now, the frame which you have applied the day before, you put the frame on the arm and you fix the frame with this first reference olive wire. Next. Now you pass second olive wire at the level of the proximal ring from the anterolateral to posterolateral direction. This is the second wire. Next. Now you connect the proximal ring with the wire and you tension the first olive wire. Next. And then you tension the second wire in the proximal ring. Next. Now you insert a third wire from the medial epicondyle from posteromedial to the anterolateral direction, but you have to be careful that you palpate the ulnar nerve and you push it away to avoid its damage. Next. And then you tension this third wire. So now you have 3 wires in a 2-ring frame. Next. Now we apply another 1 pin distally to make the frame a strong construct. And for this, we do a drill with a 2.5 mm drill bit in the lateral condyle from posterolateral to anteromedial direction. Next. And then we apply a 4 mm pin in the lateral condyle from posterolateral to anteromedial direction. Next. Then to strengthen the frame proximally, we apply 2 pins in the proximal ring. For the first pin, we take a 1-hole Rancho block in the proximal ring, and then we drill with 2.5 mm drill bit through a protective sleeve from the anterolateral to the posteromedial direction. Next. And we apply a 4 mm half pin in the proximal ring, anterolateral to posteromedial. Next. And then we apply the second pin in the proximal ring. For this, we take a 2-hole Rancho block and attach it proximally in the proximal ring. In a similar manner, we drill with 2.5 mm drill bit through a protective sleeve, and this time the direction is lateral to medial. Next. And then we apply the second 4 mm half pin in the proximal ring. So in total, we have 3 wires and 1 pin, 2 wires and 1 pin in the distal ring, and 1 wire and 2 pins in the proximal ring, which makes a strong construct. And now we have to prepare for the osteotomy. So for that, we loosen first the anterior hinge, next, and the posterior hinge. We loosen both the hinges. Next. And then we do the pre-osteotomy drilling by a 2.5 mm drill bit. First from the lateral to the medial side. Next. And then anterolateral to posterolateral. Next. And then posterolateral to anteromedial on all the 3 directions, so that we have adequate amount of pre-drilling of the bone. Next. And then we do the final supracondylar osteotomy, cutting the anterior and the posterior cortex. Next. So this was the final procedure done. Then we go for the post-op protocol. In our procedure, we go for gradual correction, usually from 5 to 7 days. And we distract the distraction unit roughly around 3 millimeters per day, which roughly equals to 1 mm distraction at the osteotomy side by the rule of similar triangles. Next. And one of the most important factor which we focus in our procedure is to correct the internal rotation deformity. So how we correct it? We do the distal fragment, we derotate it by 10 degrees by shifting all the connecting rods of the distal ring by one hole clockwise. When you will be tightening it, there will be whole of the rotation of the distal fragment anti-clockwise. But one thing which is very important, we don't do it acutely, because many times we have seen when we try to derotate it at the same sitting, the fragment gets displaced. So it's always better when there is a little callow formation, the bone is a little sticky, let's say after 2 weeks to 3 weeks, then we try to do this derotation. By that time, the bone is a little sticky, so the chances of displacement are very less. And if the internal rotation deformity is more, you can go for a further 10-degree rotation with by moving the rods one more hole after a week. Next. So as we do the gradual correction, when the complete correction is achieved, both the rings become parallel. Initially, they were mimicking the deformity. The distal ring was in varus. Then, and since the cora and the osteotomy was not at the same level, the cora was at the level of the olecranon fossa. And since we can't do osteotomy at the olecranon fossa, we are doing the osteotomy 1 to 2 centimeter above the olecranon fossa. There occurs a compensatory medial translation of the distal fragment due to this extra-articular hinges, what we call as osteotomy rule 2. As the rings have got straightened, now we replace the distraction unit by straight rods and we do a little axial compression. And frame is removed after healing is satisfactorily radiologically, usually at an average of 2.9 to 3 months. Next, we go for the patients. Whenever you will be writing a paper, you have to make this type of full chart on an Excel sheet describing all the parameters of your patients. Next. Next. So, some of the case examples. Now, this was a 16-year-old male with right cubitus varus 38 degrees. This is the pre-op photograph and the pre-op X-ray. What we call as typical gunstock deformity. This is the operative photo and the post-op X-ray. We did the osteotomy. Next. This was the pre-op X-ray and this is the final X-ray. You can see there was a medial translation because of the osteotomy rule 2 at the osteotomy site, because of which the lateral condyle is not that prominent. So these are the pictures before and after surgery. There was a quite severe 38 degrees gunstock deformity beforehand, which got fully corrected afterwards. Next. A similar case, an 8-year-old male with left cubitus varus, 13 months post-injury, with a varus of 15 degrees. Next. So these are the post-op pictures. Next. And this was the final photo in flexion and extension and the final X-ray. Next. So you can compare before and after. More or less, this is more of a cosmetic deformity because the parents are very much concerned. And especially in our region, if I say, especially if there are females, they are much more concerned because of the marriage issues. So typically, this was another case, 11-year-old female with the cubitus varus of 23 degrees. Next. And this is the post-op photo and the post-op X-ray. The osteotomy was done. Next. And this was the final picture and the final X-ray. Next. And you can compare before and after. Next. Another case, 14-year-old female with a non-union of the lateral condyle of the humerus, because of which there was a cubitus varus. Next. And this was the final picture after the correction and the final X-ray. Next. So now we go for the results. I will like to specify this is the particular section of any paper writing which I have found that many of us are lacking. We are very good in surgeries, we have very good results otherwise, but we have to document it. So what we did, you have to have a functional outcome analysis of your results. What we took for the elbow for cubitus varus is open hem grading, in which we had 25 excellent, 2 good, and 5 poor results. This was the article for that of the written by Openheim. And you have to measure your pre-op and the post-op values, both the clinical parameters and the radiological parameters. Our radiological parameter was the HEW angle, the humerus elbow wrist angle, which from 10 degree of varus went to 6 degree of valgus, and the range of motion, the mean flexion and extension, which went from 117 to 124 and minus 3.5 to 4, and the internal rotation deformity, 16.5 degree was our average, and the radiological parameter, the lateral prominence index, which came out to be minus 1.6, which is, as I said, in normal patients, it is negative. Next. And for the functional outcome of the elbow, we took the Mayo Elbow Performance Score, in which we had 23, 7, 2, and 0 cases as per the grading, excellent, good, fair, and poor. And this was the article written for the Mayo Elbow Performance Score. Next. And now the toughest part, I would say, for any paper writing, in which I took help with one of the co-authors. I think the younger surgeons, they may get well versed with the statistical analysis, or you have to take help with one of your colleagues who is well versed with the statistical analysis. Next. Actually, there are quite a particular number of terms in any statistical analysis. You have to be well versed within any MS Excel format, and there is a paired t-test, and there's a confidence interval, and there's a mean value. Next. And then you have to be a little well versed with the null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis, the p-value. So if I talk about my case, I took the help with one of the colleagues, but I think the younger surgeons, they may have a little, with a little reading, they may be well versed with it. Next. If we talk about the complications, as with any Ilizarov surgery, there has to be superficial pin tract infections. Luckily, in any of the Ilizarov surgery, if done well, usually we don't find any deep infections. There was a loss of terminal elbow flexion in 3 cases, and the lateral prominent index was positive in 1 case, and there was a valgus overcorrection even in 1 case. Next, we go for the discussion part. Next. In discussion, what we basically you have to do, you have to go for the review of literature. So what we did, we took out the articles on osteotomy treatment by cubitus varus, which have been written till now, the main articles. Next. Next. So these are the various articles on cubitus varus which we studied. Next. And traditionally, what we found out with osteotomy and internal fixation, the problem is there is no scope for post-op correction. So there are chances you may go for undercorrection or overcorrection. And because the distal fragment is very small, so many times you fix it with the screws or wires or some plates, the recurrence
occurs because of the failure of the hardware. And what the articles write, that up to 30% of this osteotomy and internal fixation, the acute correction has poor results. Next. Then we went to many studies on Elizarov treatment by cubitus varus. There were quite a couple of articles on management of cubitus virus by Elizarov, like by Song, Katani, Piskin, Bari. Next. But what we found out, the difference between our study and most of these studies, that most of these studies didn't focus on how they corrected the internal rotation deformity. And in our study, we have focused specifically that other than correction of the varus, you have to correct the internal rotation deformity by derotation of the fragment. Next. So to conclude, Elizarov is an attractive alternative for correction of the cubitus varus. The advantages: first, obviously with any Elizarov surgery, it is minimally invasive. Second, it is one of the only methods where you can go for post-op gradual corrections to fine-tune it with the normal elbow on the other side. Third, you can go for early mobilization from even the day one. And fourth, there is a no trauma of hardware removal. Next. Paper writing is always a teamwork. You can't write a paper alone. What I found, you have to have 2-3 people you have to be connected with. First, your mentor, because every surgeon has a mentor, an orthopedic surgeon who guides you with your surgical steps, to whom you can ask all your queries. For me, it was my father, Dr. Arya Agrawal, my father and my mentor. Second, I had been association of Dr. Rajiv Kaul, who helped me a lot in data processing and the article writing. And as I said, I took the help of with one of the colleagues, Dr. Neha Akun, who helped me with the statistical analysis and data preparation. And finally, Mr. Raju, who helped me with the data collection and the final article writing. Next. So in any paper writing, you have to have the disclosures. You have to get your study approved from the institutional ethical committee, and you have to take an informed consent from all your participants, and you have to mention whether there's a conflict of interest or not. Next. So again, I come to the question which I asked in my first slide, why we have these papers. So what I have analyzed, that there are basically two things which we have to focus. The first, we have to have a record keeping software. This is a particular software which I designed when I was in US, and a company bought from me. So I used to get a royalty from this software. This is one of the good ones. Either this or anyone, you have to have a record keeping software. And second, you have to do the assessment of your outcomes, both functionally and radiologically. I think the record keeping and the assessment, basically on these fronts, we lag behind, because of which we have less papers. Though, if we talk about the volumes of the surgery and volume of the working hours, we are one of the most hard-working people, I think, on the planet otherwise. Next. So thank you. This is our fellow wall. When I was in Baltimore, I had a photo in one of the galleries. They have this fellow wall. So I copied the concept from there. So we have a wall now in our hospital. We're having photos of all our fellows. Thanks a lot.
Rajat sir, great paper. I must congratulate you and your team for this excellent publication. And it actually shows that the Indian deformity surgeons are no less than the people from other parts of the world. So, sir, a few questions, let's get down to business and make this very interesting, because I saw that you put pins in the distal fragment. And sir, do you usually give any incision on the medial side to avoid injury to the ulnar nerve, especially when you're putting the lateral to medial pin, because you don't have control on where it will come out from the medial side?
So actually, we don't give any incision, but we make our direction from
posterolateral to anteromedial. We don't go to the medial side. We make a point that our pin goes on the anterior and the medial side, away from the, because ulnar nerve is on the posteromedial side, basically. The only thing is when we apply the wire from the medial side, we have to palpate. We don't give any incision, but we palpate the ulnar nerve as usually it is done. And we try to push it away and be sure that it's not get entrapped.
And sir, the other thing is about the placement of the hinges. So in your series, you have very beautifully demonstrated the osteotomy rule number 2. So how do you ensure that the hinge placement is at the cora? I saw that in your pre-constructed frame, the hinge was actually below the distal ring. So do you do an intraoperative assessment of your hinge placement?
Yeah, we do. We apply the extra articular hinges. Like we apply the hinge outside the distal ring. It's an extra juxta articular hinges. That's why there occurs the medial translation of the distal fragment.
And sir, also because you are doing a distraction osteogenesis on the medial side, so have you noticed any problems with the ulnar nerve paresthesias or maybe entrapment of the ulnar nerve in the callus? So some children may have exuberant distraction osteogenesis. So is that a problem, and how should we tackle this?
Actually, we haven't encountered. Maybe I think with acute correction, the chance of ulnar nerve entrapment may be more. But with gradual correction, in our series, we didn't found any ulnar nerve entrapment and the loss of sensation. And I think the main reason is the gradual correction. But I think if we go for acute correction, the close correction, the chances will be more.
So we can also have comments from Dr. Manish, Dr. Harshad about their opinion on the technique.
Siddharth sir, I have one question. Actually, Rajat sir, in continuation with what Dr. Siddharth was saying about the ulnar nerve, actually in your series, lot of cases were the post-surgical cases. They have already been operated either by post-pinning, either by pinning or by the open reductions. So, what care have you taken to ensure that there is no ulnar nerve injury? Because in post-surgical cases, you can't be sure that nerve will be at its original location. Because if somebody is operated by the open reduction, then definitely he must have played with the nerve.
Actually, we haven't included any case where some correction or something was done. Though we have included cases, but as I mentioned in my series, that most of our cases were closed reduction and percutaneous spinning. Like open, I think there were only 2 or 3 cases. Most of our cases which we took for a study, they were closed reduction and POP casting or percutaneous spinning.
Yeah, because you have put actually 2 wires, two olive wires on the distal side, no? That's why I'm asking, because it's a technically demanding procedure for the youngsters as well. What I think.
Yeah. Actually, when we pass the wire from the lateral side, you don't pass, as I said, you don't pass it from lateral to medial. You almost pass it 32 from posterolateral to anteromedial. That issue. The only wire with which we have to be careful is the wire which you are passing from the medial side, and you have to pass it very slow, and you have to be sure that the ulnar nerve is pushed away. That's the point where you have to take care to avoid damaging the ulnar nerve.
Yeah, can I do the answer, sir?
Yeah, Arya sir, please.
Yeah, actually, what happens? What we have felt that in the cubitus varus, the ulnar nerve is relaxed because there is a varus deformity. So we have tried to feel the ulnar nerve in a normal elbow and in the cubitus varus elbow. So we find that very easily we can feel the nerve. So just we feel the nerve put by the finger, then we put the wire. So I think in a normal elbow you may damage the ulnar nerve, but in the cubitus varus elbow you cannot damage the ulnar nerve. Number 2, I tell you, because the whole procedure is percutaneous. We have studied, we have operated a lot of cases with modified French osteotomy. Because in the cubitus torus there is internal rotation, and that is the 32 literature says that 30 to 40% cases of the cubitus torus operated by the modified French osteotomy is spoiled. So I think number third, because our proximal ring, some of the literature shows that the middle ring should be there, so it gives a better stability. But in those cases, we can damage the nerve. So our ring is a bit over at the anterior axillary fold. So lever arm is too long, so we cannot do the acute correction. So we always, whenever we have done the acute correction, we were in problem. So we should start the correction after 5 to 7 days. Second, that you ask the ulnar nerve distraction. Because we do trigonometry, so there is only 1 millimeter distraction at the, we calculate by the trigonometry, 1 millimeter distraction at the osteotomy site. So I think personally, we have worked about 30, 40 years. As Ponseti has given the clubfoot treatment, in the same way, this is the only way to treat the clubfoot. Third thing I want to tell you, when we do the rotation, when after 2-3 weeks, when the bone become soft callus is formed, then we will do the rotation. Initially cases we have done the rotation, the bone fragment was displaced. So I think if you follow all these things, there is no nerve or vessel damage, and this is the best technique of the cubitus.
Harsha sir, you want to say something?
Yeah. Excellent paper, Rajat. Very well presented. Sorry, beginning part of it I missed because of internet issues. Congratulations to you and Dr. Rama Agarwal, sir. I have one question, sir. We had a lot of discussion on these things, but my confusion continues. I couldn't understand what you just now told about the rotation deformity. Number one, clockwise or anti-clockwise? Are you looking at the ring, last ring from the top of the shoulder towards the elbow? Or are you looking from the distal hand towards the elbow and then deciding whether it is anti-clockwise, clockwise? So that confusion still remains in my mind. Which way you look, whether it is anti-clockwise or clockwise. What I had basically thought was a simple elbow. You have, for example, you have a varus deformity, which goes medially, and internal rotation deformity. So you have to correct valgus and external rotation so that you get it corrected. If you do a wedge osteotomy laterally, there is no distraction on the ulnar nerve. But when you do an osteotomy by Ilizarov and distract medially, at the site of the medial border of humerus, then the ulna, which is more distal, will definitely get distracted more than a millimeter. I don't know what formula you have used, but I think this is what it is. But I have never seen radial nerve, ulnar nerve palsy occurring because of this. Not that we have done many cases, but with a few cases only in hand, this is experience. And for many, many years, it has not been done in my hand, so I do not know about it. I'm very happy you have done a good thing for Asami India and India that you have published this with only 7 or 8 publications in the whole world. It should be very good. A big feather in your cap. Thank you so much.
Brother, sir.
About the rotation, I would feel that once for all, if you finish everything without giving complications in the OT and wait for it to heal and remove it off after say 6 weeks, if I'm correct, it should be the best way. Instead of trying to rotate when the osteotomy becomes sticky so that it doesn't displace, you can always look for displacements in the C-arm inside the OT and then reconnect or readjust your hinges a little bit. If you use universal hinge, it will be possible for you to do it.
Raja sir.
I think that's the way I look at it, but I don't know. Each one is satisfied with the way they are doing it.
So first we take 2 half rings and we connect with the bolts and nuts, and we make it a full ring. And then we take 2 15-centimeter threaded rods and we join it on the first hole, one on the right side and one on the left side.
So 2 half rings, we make one full ring, 2 threaded rods, and then we took another full ring and we connect the rods. Now we take out the bolt and nut on one side, and we took a one hole male post. This is for to make the hinge, and we apply this one hole male post instead of the bolt and nut on the distal ring, and we tighten it. Similarly, we take out the bolt and nut from the other side also, and we apply a one hole male post. So this is the distal ring. We apply hinge anterior and posterior in the sagittal plane exactly opposite to each other. And we tighten this male post. Now on the proximal ring, we also remove the bolt and we apply a 2-hole plate. And we connect it with the bolt and the and similarly now on the other side also, we apply the 2-hole plate. We remove the bolt and the screw. And we apply. So on one side, we have one hole male post. On the other side, we have 2-hole plates. Now we take one hole bushings and we connect it over the one hole male post. And we take one hole female and we connect a 15 centimeter threaded rod with it. And we apply this over the bushing and our hinge is ready. And we do it on the both sides, anterior and posterior on the distal ring. So first we applied a one hole male post. Over it we applied a one hole bushing. And over it we applied a construct of a one hole female and a threaded rod. And on the other side, we connect it with the 2-hole plates. So this is our juxta-articular hinge on the distal ring, connected with 2-hole plates on the proximal ring. And now we make the distraction unit. For this, we take what we call it as a double hinge, and we apply it on the center and the middle hole on the medial side. And we connect it both in the proximal ring and the distal ring. We take a one hole male and we connect it with this double hinge, both proximally and distally. So this is on the medial side. We have the distraction unit, and then now we take a 15 centimeter threaded rod and we connect it, both the double hinges with it. And now our distraction unit is ready. So now we have hinges on the distal ring above and below, and the distraction rod on the medial side. And we tighten the rod on the one side of the distraction unit. And we loosen the hinges. And you lose the distraction unit on one side. And see how beautifully such a simple construct, and it can just move. And this is the mimicking the deformity to start with. And then slowly you will be distracting and the rings will become straight. And now this is another video of the internal rotation, how we do the internal rotation. So this is the pre-constructed frame, which we just saw. And as when we correct it fully, see the both rings get straight now. This is which we are showing the full correction, and now how we do the internal rotation. So we remove the threaded rod on the distal ring and made it clockwise one hole. And as you tighten it, it will derotate and there will be a 10 degree of external rotation of the distal fragment. It's a very simple procedure and very simply you can do for external rotation. This is the video of the procedure. So this is the first olive wire we passed from posterolateral to anteromedial, and then we fix the frame over this first wire and we tighten it. Now we apply the second wire in the proximal ring from anterolateral to posteromedial direction, the second olive wire. And then we fix the proximal ring with this second wire and we tighten it. And we tension the first wire also. So we tension the first wire, the second wire, and our basic frame is ready. And then we apply the second wire in the distal ring from medial to lateral side. And in this point, we have to protect the ulnar nerve. And we fix this wire also with the distal ring and we tension it. And now we apply one pin in the distal ring to make the construct more strong. And we make first a 2.5 mm drill bit and then we apply the pin. And then for proximally we applied 2 pins. We took a 1-hole wrencho and through it we first drill with 2.5 mm and then a 4 mm pin is applied. And then we took a 2-hole wrencho proximally and we first did the drilling and then we applied the pin. So now we have 2 pins, 1 wire proximally and 1 pin and 2 wires distally. And now before the osteotomy, we loosen the hinges, both above and below, the anterior and posterior. And then we do the pre-osteotomy drilling, the lateral to medial side, anterolateral to posterior medial, and posterolateral to anteromedial. And then we finally do the supracondylar osteotomy. We cut the anterior and the posterior cortex. And the distraction is started from day 7. And finally, when you get the correction and the rings become parallel, you apply 4 threaded rods. This is important. Before removing the hinges, you have to apply 4 rods. Otherwise, your frame will become loose. And then you remove the distraction unit on the medial side, and you can remove both of your hinges. And now you have a straight construct, 2 rings with 4 threaded rods. Now you remove the hinges. This is the frame after full correction, and there is a medial translation.
Nice video, sir. You said pretty simple. It's
Very nice and very clear. Excellent. Like you said, anybody can see it and then even perform it if they can understand it.
We have the best cameras.
Yeah, it was nicely demonstrated video.
By world's best doctors. Isn't it? It's good. I think we are proud of you all.
A nice technique, sir. And Dr. Manish, yeah, you have some question.
Sir, good evening, everybody. Rajat sir and RA sir, heartiest congratulations. The paper has been published in a very reputed journal, along with very few cases, very few papers as suggested by Dr. Shah earlier. So many congratulations on that. Sir, one basic doubt I wanted to ask you. One is, what is the minimum age you have tried this procedure on? what age kid? And secondly, sir, it's an upper limb, and usually a procedure obviously for younger children. So in all your cases you demonstrated the use of the metal rings. So do you advocate or do you think about carbon rings also, sir? If not, why, sir? And if yes, obviously it is lighter, but is there any particular disadvantage that you have always used metal rings? Because carbon rings being lighter, they may make life easy for the patients. Just two basic doubts, sir, nothing else. Otherwise, an excellent demonstration of the technique, sir. Thank you very much.
Manish, you asked me two questions. First is like where we always wait for 1 year post injury because these are children, so we give ample time for remodeling. So usually we always, whenever the patient comes, because the deformity is obvious even after 2 to 3 months if it has not been properly treated. But we always ask the patient to wait for 1 year and see how much remodeling occurs. And even after that, if there is more than 10 degrees of deformity, then only we go for this procedure. So minimum, if you wait for 1 year or so, you'll hardly find any patient less than 5 to 6 years old. All your patients will be at least more. Actually, earlier we tried with the carbon rings with many of these surgeries, not even cubitus varus, but somehow the quality or maybe the rings used to get bent as there occurs a lot of tension, especially in deformity cases. If it's a simple trauma case where you don't have to do any deformity correction, the carbon ring may be a good alternative. But in our practice, we found that when there is a deformity and you are correcting it, there's so much force is there, the carbon ring used to get bent. So we abandoned the rings for deformity and we started only with steel rings. But yes, for trauma, I think carbon is a good alternative. But maybe many surgeons may be doing deformity correction with carbon ring. But with our center, we have now stick to steel rings for deformity correction.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Rajesh, sir.
Yeah.
The surgeons who advocate open reduction and putting the internal fixation like that, so if in early age group, they recommend some sort of overcorrection sometimes in some of the literature also in younger age group, just to avoid the recurrence and all that. So have you considered that as well in younger age group?
No, actually, we go for just 1 to 2 degree of overcorrection because it's not with the 8-pid or something like genu varus or valgus where you go for, because in elbow we haven't seen or even I haven't read it anywhere that you go for more correction of the carrying angle so that it again recurs. Because with Elizarov, I think since it's a gradual correction, the chances of recurrence are pretty less. With internal fixation, in fact, in any type of internal fixation, if the distal fragment is very small, the chances of recurrence are very high. So they may go for overcorrection when you go for the with internal fixation, but not with Elizarov. We haven't.
And what was the average frame time in your cases?
2.9 months.
2.9 months.
But usually we say 3 months to the patient. After that, you just remove the frame and you ask the patient to go for a full movement as much possible as you can.
So in now after this technique you have developed, so now in all cases of cubitus varus you go for this technique or you choose to?
Well, it's like a religion now. We follow it like a religion. If there is a cubitus varus, we'll be doing Elizarov no matter what.
That's what I'm
because
asking.
It's so. Yeah. We follow it like religion. Yeah. This is one of the few indications of Elizarov where we follow it 100%. Otherwise, for every disease, you have multiple options. You can't say no, only Elizarov. But yes, this is one of the few indications where we will strictly advise to adhere to Elizarov.
Yeah, Ravi, I tell you, now we can never think and imagine for an open surgery because in the modified French osteotomy, we have spoiled a lot of the children with open surgery. So we can't imagine the open surgery. I think this is best
Actually,
technique.
sir, you have developed a very nice technique, and you are a very experienced surgeon for so many of years of experience. That's why you are doing it so easily and doing it nicely. But even the French osteotomy is now, people don't do French osteotomy sort of thing nowadays. They do differently. They do the plating over that and just immediately translate the thing just
It's
to
all
avoid the lateral
modified now.
problems.
There are many modified surgeries,
Yeah.
and
So
most of the time it is very forgiving surgery. Even the rotations, you do not correct too much, this, that, and all. It's quite forgiving surgery.
yeah,
The end results are really from good to excellent.
yeah, definitely.
Very few fall into the fair and poor group.
But
That's the reason you have alternative to what Dr. Agarwals have developed their method, which is very good, very simple, very nice. And really, you should pick it up and learn to do. All Assami members must pick it up and learn to do it.
yeah, definitely, sir. Actually, what usual surgeons and what many pediatric orthopedic surgeons are doing, actually, that's an open, and that's also a relevant, very good procedure. Also, open. They don't do modified French nowadays so much, and there are other open reductions techniques as well, which are giving the good results. But the technique that you have developed is really nice, and you are giving us such a nice results. Therefore, as in Asami or some Ilizarov surgeons, they can nicely adapt this as an alternative, as a best alternative. So
Ravi, I would like to make a comment because more or less this is a cosmetic surgery.
yeah,
So, and you have other limb on the other side to compare. That's what we have found in most of the parents, that they even 1 or 2 degrees, even the parent, the relatives, everyone who comes to meet, they sit and they compare. थोड़ा सा कम लग रहा है, थोड़ा सा कहीं ज्यादा तो नहीं हो गया, because there is a comparison and there is a cosmetic deformity. And with Ilizarov, you can fine tune it later on. With open surgery, you can do it very well. That's not the problem, but you cannot fine tune it. And it's a cosmetic surgery. That's what we have seen. That's one of the advantages with any Ilizarov surgery.
yeah,
The being cosmetic. Yeah.
Yeah, Ravi, one thing I tell you, since we have started the juxta-articular hinges, so there is no chance of the lateral prominence, lazy S deformity. So we have developed actually in the world juxta-articular hinges. And after that, we found there is no complication and we can correct the deformity nicely.
there is no doubt, sir. This is one of the best technique, and this Raja sir has nicely demonstrated, and especially by the videos he has demonstrated, and everyone can adapt it now. Whosoever is interested in Ilizarov as an alternative form of treatment besides open reduction, it's a very good technique.
You, in the JBJS, usually they take 1 year. So we have sent it in September. They have accepted in November. And in December, they have published this article. It means they were very much influenced by this article.
Yeah, acceptance time, basically they take a lot of time to review as such, JBJS, and even JPO takes a lot of time. Siddharth sir, you want?
Yes. So excellent point from the viewpoint of deformity correction, Ravi, but I would also like to add something for the people who want to publish. Now, this article got published because their methodology was really strong, and I must congratulate the team for this. But there is one thing that I would like to add, although the study has already done this, but there is something known as the Equator Network. And you can look at the website Equator, and on that website, you will find guidelines for all sorts of studies. So, Dr. Rajat, unknowingly, sir, you have already done, there is something for observational studies, there is something known as the STROBE checklist. It is strengthening of observational studies in epidemiology. So for case control studies or case series or retrospective studies, if we just follow the STROBE guidelines, and you've already done that in your study, you have not written it, but unknowingly you have already done all the steps.
No,
but this is how we can strengthen the paper.
Actually, Ravi, as I said, that there are two ways. Either you get a colleague who is well versed with the statistics, or you learn by yourself. As I said, younger surgeons, they can learn by myself. But for all these terms, I don't know much, and I am not even much bothered because you can't have all things by yourself. So it's always a teamwork. So one of my colleagues is well versed with all these terms you are saying. But yes, the younger surgeons, it's much better that they know by themselves. So it will be much easier to write a paper.
Actually, it's a fact, sir. Actually, in India, we have very good surgeons, actually, but we don't have good researchers as well, actually. So,
No, but Dr. Ravi, this is really easy. I mean, the checklist is not very difficult. All you have to do is go to the website, download this. You can do this in a PDF format or a Word document. And if you are planning to aim for a good journal, they will always ask for these checklists. So, I mean, this is not rocket science. This is very simple. Dr. Rajat and team have already done it. Like I said, they have all the tick marks there. But it is like basic, very simple things. What are the inclusion criteria? What are the exclusion criteria? What is your intervention? If there is a control group, what is the definition of the controls? Then importantly, like Dr. Rajat said, what are your outcome measures? What are you trying to measure? Is it the amount of deformity corrected, like the HEW angle in this case? Is it the flexion extension? So if all these things are addressed in a manuscript in a very systematic way, then it makes it so much easier, because as a reviewer, I have seen many good papers, describing very good techniques, but the method section of the paper is not so good, and that is one of the reasons why it gets rejected. So the only message I'm trying to give here is that these are very simple things to do. All of us, when we are trying to publish papers, we can just check it.
Siddharth sir, as a lot of young surgeons are now adopting the Ilizarov techniques and methods of Ilizarov, so what suggestions you have for them, just for the how they should manage their data, how they should manage their data collection, and how they manage means? So any suggestions for that?
So I would say I agree with Dr. Rajat. You need to have an electronic database. I mean, gone are the times when you had a register in which you are writing down everything, and everyone who is wanting to publish now, the database may be a proprietary database, or you can simply make an Excel sheet. It could be as simple as that. Other thing I would say is, please invest some time in making a protocol. Now, it could be a 2-page protocol. All you need to know is what are your aims and objectives of the study, how are you going to conduct it, and what outcome measures. So always think of the PCOS, that is your patient's inclusion exclusion criteria, the intervention, the control group, outcome, and statistics. If you can do this 2-page exercise, it should take not more than 3-4 days. Then you will find that the quality of the work improves, because sometimes the paper is finished and then you realize, मुझे तो ये भी कर लेना चाहिए था. अगर मैंने ये कर लिया होता तो कैसे होता? So if you do this mental exercise, and it should not take more than 4 or 5 days. And again, like Dr. Rajat said, you have a mentor. So go to your mentor, ask him what are the important surgical viewpoints. Then go to your statistician or whoever colleague is good with statistics, plan out the statistics part, make a 2-page protocol so that you are not, burdened by it at the end. So essentially write the materials and methods even before you publish the materials and methods.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, actually in data collection, when we are starting to collect our data, or even not even collecting the data for our paper, when we are doing the cases and preserving that data for further studies or for further research, then what points we should consider at the time of preserving that data, so that in the later years we don't regret that we have not included this part, because it is more important with respect to the statistics or methodology, and we have forwarded that part at that time.
So for that, I would say try to capture as much data as possible. Try to get everything in, because you don't know which parameter you will find useful, and this may come in handy. And for this purpose, I think a software like Dr. Rajat has said would be very handy. So you try to get as much demographic and baseline information as possible.
Thanks, sir. Harsha sir, you want to say something?
Yeah. Siddharth has given everything in detail, technical point of view. Every full paper is like a thesis writing. It is not as simple as you think that, okay, 4 pages you are going to write down. When your thesis is ready, when you abridge it, it becomes a 4-page full paper presentation for publication. So when you begin with, and when you want to collect data, Ravi, you were telling how to collect data, what to do and all that, isn't it? Like what we do for the thesis, you need to see that all the data is collected. Whether you put it in soft format, or whether you want to write it down on your protocol sheets of follow-up of the patient, of course, the initial recording of the patient, every single detail that you require according to the thesis that you're doing. You have a pro forma written for your thesis. So similarly, when you have patients of similar kind, here you have a definite diagnosis of supracondylar fracture treated by Ilizarov, and you want to see the outcomes. So you have every patient's case sheet. You have 20 or 30 patients. You have all the patients' case sheets. You have all the details. And one of the simplest is to have a big spreadsheet like Excel sheet, which will make you compare all the details about various things. It is what we call as master chart in our thesis. So a dissertation or thesis, it's something similar to that. And somebody has to be given this job. We orthopedic surgeons cannot do it. You have to see that all this data collection and analysis of whatever data has been collected is done by non-doctoral people, like statistical people, or I have postgraduates. So postgraduates are there in medical colleges, or you have fellows who can do this. But you have to be determined to publish, then you can do it. If you're not determined to publish, then you'll never go ahead with the publication.
Ravi, I would like to make a point on this. Let's see that to have any outcome, I think your question is that we are just doing surgeries regularly. And suppose we keep doing surgeries, at one point of time, we saw that the results of these particular surgeries are quite good, and let's publish a paper on this. When we are doing surgeries, we are not determined that we will be writing a paper on this.
That exactly was my question.
Yeah. So as I said, that only thing which we lack is in the outcome. So outcome we assess either by radiologically or functionally. Radiologically, if we have the X-rays, we can measure it anytime. Any criteria we can measure. We have to just have to keep the X-rays in our software, the pre-op and the post-op and the final. The main problem which comes later on when you decide that, okay, let's write a paper, is the functional outcome, because the patients are gone. So when you are going for, let's say, any surgery, there are joint scores, let's say shoulder, elbow, hip, knee. So the thing is that we should adapt a particular score for a particular area. Let's say you are doing any knee surgery. You have adopted, there are many scores. You just take out like one of the common scores, and you just see that all your patients, they are assessed with a score, irrespective you will be writing a paper later on or not. Because this is the most important point which hampers later on. So my suggestion is, for every surgery, for every body part, you take any common score and you just fix it. Okay, if I'm doing an elbow, I'll be going with this score. If I'm doing an ankle, I will be going with this. And later on, if you have this functional outcome, because radiologically you can have it anytime, you have to just keep your X-rays. So I think, and that's the only thing which I haven't seen anywhere. Most of the surgeons in India, nobody takes any functional outcome score to assess their patients regularly. Yeah. So my strong suggestion will be there that we should adopt a functional outcome score for our every patient. Just any common score which is
definitely. Actually, what you are saying, what Siddharth sir was saying, that making a protocol, I think we should make it sure that whether we are publishing it or not, if we are doing a case, we should be having a protocol, and we should follow that protocol. That protocol should include radiological as well as functional scores, so that at any point of time, if we want to publish it or if we want to assess our results, we can go ahead with the retrospective as well as the prospective way.
So, Dr. Rajat, that is a great point. In fact, like even if you are doing a simple thing, not simple, but a routine surgery like a hip replacement, it makes sense to record the Harris hip score. You know, this helps not only in paper writing, but suppose the patient says, I have not improved. So the Harris hip score may have actually improved post-op, you know, and you have a solid ground to show whether there has been any improvement or not. So I completely agree with you. And about the protocol, even if you want to do a retrospective study, you want to look at your data, it helps to have a small protocol to, you know, so that it helps you decide what you exactly want to do.
Nice point. So I think we are rightly at 9 o'clock. So we should wrap it up. It was a great technique. It was great discussion and nice comments by Siddharth sir and Rajat sir. Harsha sir, thanks a lot for your presence.
No problem. We are always there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you, Rajat sir. Thank you, Siddharth sir.
Rajat, very good.
Thanks, Dr. Manish.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Well done, Rajat sir. Thank you, everybody, and good evening, everybody. Good evening, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Humans.